right, so today on the show, we have Joel Smith here. So super excited to get you on, Joel. We just talked about how we're in the relatively the same area here in Southwest Ohio. Southwest Ohio? Yeah, that sounds right. But I'm still relatively new to the area. This doesn't make as much sense. Like it's not like a grid system. So I still like get lost in Cincinnati all the time, like in comparison to where I was living in Seattle. You can point me in the right direction and pick it out pretty well. But yeah, Joel, enough of me talking. How about we get into who you are? Give us a little bit of a elevator pitch and yeah, just see what's going on.
Yeah, sounds good. And I was going to say, I still don't know my way around. Been here 2 years and I
Right.
still don't know my way around Cincinnati. I just hang out and hang out on the east side and, pretty much that's about it, sadly. Anyways, so yeah, my name is Joel Smith and I've been in the world of coaching for about 15 years now. Sometimes I have to, 38 now. So like, when did I start again? Yeah. Did track and field, strength and conditioning. It's one of those interesting, sometimes I think to myself, like, there's these posts on people who are, strength and conditioning nihilists, like James Smith. Like, do we really need, what is this thing in strength? And I say that because I was much more drawn to track and field originally. Like, I played basketball in high school, was a track athlete in college. And it's interesting thinking about why I wasn't as good at basketball, because I did have the talent, but all the mental stuff just fascinates me, and the motor learning and all the things I should have done if I wanted to be actually better at basketball. But track was such a fascination because I was just so, like, outputs was just such a puzzle to me. Like, how do I just get 1 inch higher in my jump? How do I run just a little bit faster? And so I had some really influential coaches over the years, and in graduate school, my advisor was like, well, you have to pick, you have to be one or the other, you have to do track or strength. And I was like, well, I guess I'll do track. But then which I did for 6 years, and then strength and conditioning found me back. And I spent 8 years at UC Berkeley doing strength and conditioning. So that was something that there was originally elements of strength and conditioning that I just did not find exciting. And I will say, maybe we can talk about this too, but like, the more I learn about biomechanics, like the shapes of the body, the adaptations, the compensations, it makes a strength and conditioning program more interesting to me. But I also at the same time believe that there is also a very, you could call it like archaic, not in a bad way, but like there is a core package of just the process of becoming a stronger human being that's not that intellectual, that is really powerful. And so, you have those two things. Anyways, left Cal a couple of years ago. I've actually been, about 2 years now. I've been in Cincinnati, private sector. So working my website, podcast, Just Fly Sports. I do a lot of online training, and then do a little bit of training in person in the area. And it's a nice balance to my life right now. I'm enjoying it. And yeah, so age 38, that's where I am. Private sector, after coaching strength and track in the formal settings. I'm on my own these days.
Gotcha. Are there any big changes that you notice with making that move to Ohio? Like, how do you feel about Ohio? I guess is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, no, like culturally, it's a lot different. I used to live in Berkeley, man. And like, I
Right.
think I have, I come from families that are very like, not to be political, very conservative in nature. And I love Berkeley. Like this, like, if you wanted to go to a static dance or something, it was like 6 blocks down the road, or all the weird stuff you ever wanted to do is like literally right there. If I wanted to do that now, I'd have to drive like an hour. It's just, and not just that, but just like there's some interesting cultural things. You learned a lot there. Of course the weather's nice, but I will say, being back in the Midwest is really cool. It's definitely a little bit more laid back. You don't have to like work as hard to make it in the sense, and you don't have to
Hmm.
trade as much of your time for just to, keep a roof over your head and all that stuff. And so it does, I'm grateful that that's a little bit easier here. And I'm trying to use my time to just learn more about myself in the process of athletics. And, it's May here now. So it's like, this is amazing. If it was like this all year, it'd be awesome. But I also really appreciate the seasons, and I really appreciate, and that's something I'm thinking more and more about. And the more I get into like, nature stuff, I went to Rafe Kelly's Return to the Source last year. You realize how disconnected we are from the flow of like the seasons of life. Like, what does spring represent? What does summer, fall, and like that late summer rest period in winter? And I just think that, yeah, for longevity's sake too, as an athlete who I'm still planning on doing like track meets this summer, you see how like not getting the rhythms right leads to burning out earlier and just not doing things the way that I think ideally are. So that being said, I appreciate the seasons here because, in California, you really didn't get that so much.
Yeah, definitely. I know my buddy, I visit him pretty often. He was in Orange County out there. And I feel like I'm in the twilight zone when I'm there. Like I'll fly from, dead of winter here out to LA and I'm like, the heck is going on here? It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't compute. But I'm actually curious to kind of dive into that and what you mean more about like the cyclical nature and burnout and what that sort of looks like. Are you speaking in sort of, because I think that's something I think about a lot, especially when I'm creating a program, because I'm always thinking, even if I'm only going to see someone for maybe a month and I'm just doing like a quick rehab thing, I'm also thinking, well, what is their training potentially going to look like in a year, 2 years, 3 years? What does that what can we cycle through? When can we push strength? When do we need to push power and all of those different things? So I'd be curious to kind of just let you expand on that.
Yeah, for sure. There's kind of two ways I look at it. Like one is you can be the very hardcore, like literal sense, like we do not follow the seasons as humans. Like we have the wrong sports at the wrong times, and we like. I mean, the way I see it, some things flow naturally. Like track and field's an ancient sport, and the main competitive season in actual like track, like pro track, is the summer, and summer is like the season of competition. Like that's like the fire element. So for example, so you could be a literalist and say, well, shoot, you only should really be competitive and really unleash all your explosiveness in the summer or something like that. I don't think that's the case, but I mean, not 100%. Like, I
Mhm.
think some shades of that should be in the system, in the sense of like the fall is like the late summer is the time to rest. Like it is this downtime. And the thing is that seasons are all over the place. And I think that you can become like, especially once you get in like the holistic health, like journey, there's a lot of things that you can be such a purist about, that the human body is super resilient, like it adapts. Like even I think a common thing in that industry might be electromagnetic pollution, like 5G
Mhm.
towers, or not like conspiracy theory, but just like all this. We live in a different environment that we used to, like, and you feel it if you go out in the woods, away from Wi-Fi. Like there's something about being out there that you do feel different. But like I had this conversation with Mark Wetzel, or Dr. Mark Wetzel, on my show. Is like, it's like human beings are resilient. Like we adapt to stressors and stimuli. Yes, there's more electronic pollution, but to say that we can't deal with any of it is kind of silly. And like we can adapt to what's put our way. And so I think it's similar in a level with like the seasonality. I mean, humans, I heard this on a podcast, like, yeah, like even if your nutrition's bad, like humans can eat, like you could eat like garbage if you had to, like
Right.
your body can do it. So there is the ideal, like, oh yeah, we really should. But sadly, I mean, no, or not, I don't know. It's just not the way it is. But I do think like paying respect to at least seasons of accumulation, seasons of where you're like seasons of accumulating and seasons of reaping, I think for the sake of just long term is helpful. And I think we just know it. Like you can't play the same sport year round. Like you have to do, and not even, and even in the sense of like like you could play that same sport. It's like, oh well, we're gonna just do the same sport but less of it here, or less intense. It's like, no, like I think the way I just see it in a practical sense is I think you fundamentally have to just completely shift gears at some point in the year, like where competition is not on your brain, making progress is not on your brain, like doing things just for the pure fun or pure relaxation sense is of the highest priority. So that's just the way that I've kind of put it into a practical, is like, yes, you can get carried too far a little bit with sticking the seasons. Exactly. I do think it'd be cool to do that at some point,
Mhm.
but the world and the schedules we live in, I do think just treating that with a little bit more seasonality, just a little bit more like, look, this is your fire. This is the period of fire. This is the period of a little bit more accumulation. This is the period of rest. And looking at that with a nature perspective, I think can it be valuable? And if nothing else, help people to maybe intuitively understand what's going on a little bit more.
Yeah, totally. I've definitely gone down that rabbit hole. It reminds me when I was living in Seattle, like, I wouldn't eat a banana in the middle of winter because I thought it would kill me somehow. Or, I definitely still practice a lot of like the grounding, some of the
Yeah. Same
like
here.
morning sun. Like before I got on this call, I was outside just throwing the frisbee with my dog and, just being outside. It's fantastic. But no, we could definitely get carried away. But I like the idea of us being resilient. You think even though humans might have had potentially better, cleaner environments, back in primal days, they still were probably like eating dirt and, just undercooked
Well,
things all the time, or jaguars. And like, there's so many other different types of stresses then.
yeah.
So it's, which one are you going to pick? I'll probably going to pick the EMF pollution versus saber-toothed tigers and
Or someone else trying to kill you, like
yeah,
uh,
exactly.
the
Like
average
tribal
lifespan back
warfare,
then. Yeah, the average lifespan back then for all the, the glory of a primitive ancestral lifestyle was not that long due to murders.
murders, infections. That's a big
Yeah.
one. So, but getting a little dark there. But
Sorry, yeah,
anyways,
sorry to start that off that way. I
nah,
apologize.
no worries. I so kind of jumping back into the cyclical stuff. What do you think for? Because I'm assuming you train obviously like a younger population to some degree. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah. Who I work with in person is mostly high school. I would
Okay,
say that's like the average. Some, 10 early 20s is my
gotcha.
average.
So would you say like kind of again building off of what you were saying, you have this like fire sport, track and field, something like that. What do you think about these kids that are coming through and they have, they're playing 4 or 5 different sports in a year? They have all this stuff going on nonstop and they're trying to be competitive. Do you ever give them, recommendations of, hey, this is your main sport, this is your focus. We're going to really hone in on this, but, maybe have swim on the side, which, you don't really care about, but it's fun, it's conditioning. Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think for the people I work with in person more, it kind of it is what it is in the sense like I don't think the parents are as interested in um like saying, hey, like how can we hack the travel ball system? And it's
Mhm.
too bad that more people aren't interested in that. I don't think there's anything wrong with playing 3 sports and taking the summer off. But I think the nature of it all has changed a little bit more, where it's like, it's not like you're just playing 3 sports for school and then that's it and you get the summer to chill. Like it's like there's club, like I think the club thing, and I think that the pressure of college and that like gotta get a scholarship, like that carrot at the end of the stick, I think really has had a generally probably a much more negative impact than it has a positive. In fact, I feel like if you could go in a time machine and remove that, like going for a college scholarship, I would love to see what sports look like now. I mean, it might be almost sad for all the, sports performance trainers out there, because then
Mhm.
but I think that their job would be different. I just think the job would be different, going through like Rafe Kelly's and Return to the Source and like looking into play and human movement and how we move as a community and enjoy that. Anyways, a little bit of a rabbit trail, but it's more like in the online space. Actually, I have more parents interested in like, all right, this time of year, like, what should we be doing? This time, I think just in the online, it's like whoever's looking for you is going to find you. So that's where I think I've been able to play more of a role there. Like, for example, working with like a soccer player who's in the European system, where you basically don't have a choice. You're playing 11 months out of the year, and I can't change that. And if you want to be good, if you want to be pro, you pretty much have to do that. I don't necessarily see an alternative, but like what I'll do there is like I'll be like, look, like at least once a week, just play basketball and don't worry about outputs. Like literally just have as much fun as possible. And that seems to have been really helpful. It's kind of like, it is what it is in some of these situations, but for a lot of it, or the same thing actually in person with like a group of runners that I train, that like literally all they do is running. I mean, they don't play other sports, and it's a thing where it's like, it's the private sector gym system where like I mean, it's as much as you'd love to do it, like I mean, and I will like just cancel classes for 2-3 weeks out of the year or whatever, just because like I don't need to see you. I shouldn't see you. Like me making this money isn't worth the fact that you need to learn to rest and just not do anything for a few weeks, like, but it's like, oh, we got to make money, we got to get, we want to have them in, like, no. And I've had this conversation even with like Paul Cato. I was having it with him recently, who's been on my podcast, and this idea that it's almost like we should do something else for our daily sustenance and shelter. Like, I don't know, work in the garden or something. And then all the sports stuff should be free. And in the sense that not that it's not valued. Like, I think that that's a misnomer. Like what we do is valuable, but I don't know. There's something to do with like, I mean, even if you have the experience of just volunteering in sport, be it a high school, youth sport, whatever, there's something that's so like rewarding about that feels like this is kind of how it always should be on some level. But we've like kind of professionalized everything and atomized everything, and it's just it's easy to say, oh, the system is so screwed, I just hope it all blows up and blah blah blah. Like, no, sport's good, but anyways, I'll just say that with those people who do things year round, I just try to really make it a point to, at some point in the year, or sorry, the week, like you have a day that's movement. It's like a pro athlete playing golf, where it's like
Yeah.
Michael Jordan just switched basketball off entirely and just played golf, like where you can just turn that switch and you're just a human being having fun. And so for like the distance group, we always do something fun to start. Like it can never be all about running. Like it can never be all about, well, just come in and, you know, your parents are paying so that you're a faster runner and all this stuff. And it's like, you know, because one day you're not going to be running competitively anymore, at least like on the high school or maybe college level if you're going there. And at some point you need to remember what it's like to be a kid and just to be fun, to have fun, where like the scholarship and the time didn't matter. And so that's a big part of what I always try to have something at the beginning of a session that reminds people of that.
Do you think there's benefit to? So I come from a background of track and field as well, cross country, swim, all those different things. Some wrestling in there. I was not good at wrestling, but but that said, do you think there's benefit to? Those are very, you're competing against yourself in a lot of ways
Yeah.
versus, obviously cross country, there's a scoring system. Track and field, you can come in first, second, third. There is some competition, but it's different than some of these team based sports in some ways. Do you ever tell people who maybe play these sports, or you have like bouts or weeks of different types of activities that are more team based for these individual based sports? Does that make sense?
Um, oh yeah, yeah. I know what you're saying. Basically giving individual athletes the team sport experience. Like,
Exactly. Do you
yeah.
think that there's benefits to that?
Oh, massive. Like
Yeah.
I've talked about it. I mean, it's something I'm still trying to unpack the full ramifications of, but even let's just say we only live in a world of outputs.
Mhm.
And again, I love outputs. Like that's been a big part of my life. Is still I'm still trying to figure out how to run faster, even, you know, relative to my ability and my age right now. I mean, it's this puzzle that you'll never be able to fully solve, and I really appreciate it. But if we only speak on outputs, team sport is actually massive to individual sports, and I've seen that on so many levels. Like, yeah, I was just telling this story. Like when I mean, my 400 was slow. I mean, I ran the 4x4 in high school. I didn't train for it. Like I just played basketball, and then
Mhm.
I went and I did track, and I did like trained high jump, once a week, trained hurdles once a week. Maybe ran like I jogged to a mile to the school where I did high jump. I think that was my aerobic conditioning. Like some years did more tempo than others. But
Yeah.
my senior year did almost no tempo, did very little like formal, like very little speed endurance work. And yeah, I ran a 54. Like I let off in like 54 for the 4x4. Like it's okay. It's not good, but like yeah, it's better than average, I guess. I don't know. Maybe not. But for me, like who never felt like I was fast growing up, like I felt like that was okay. And then I got to college and trained like formally, like hard, like typical tempo training, like 20-minute continuous hill runs, like tons of tempo and repeat 400s and all that. And I go in the first this I mean it's so bad, like I'm indicting myself by being so slow, but I never I don't I never want to blame things on genetics, but anyways, long story short, I ran a 57 split. That was horrible. That was the last time I ever ran the 400 in college. And all that endurance, all that speed endurance, and some speed too, like my first 200 was okay with speed from a speed perspective, but that was pretty bad. And despite all that, and it was just it's like it's a combination of like the community, and there's so many good things that happen in team sport from a perception of fatigue state. Like you could be playing basketball, I believe, and if you look at the GPS or you look at what the accumulation of fatigue, you could be by far superseding something that's asked of you in an interval workout. But then you're perceiving it differently because it's in the context of a game. And if your mind isn't telling you this is hard and you have an external goal, you will push yourself harder. And then there's also a lot of nuance with the change of direction in team sport that, if we're talking expansion and compression, it's really cool because you have in a change of direction, a cut, you have one side that's very expansion biased and one side that's more compression biased, even more so than running straight ahead or anything like that. And I just think that's like this, it's like this high velocity, all these things we try to do in the gym, which are awesome. It's almost this high velocity, like ringing of the body, if that makes sense. That's so athletic. And there's just this thing that only high velocity can give you sometimes. And so I think there's a lot of that. It just creates this really dynamic environment. And like I had the opportunity to work with an elite 800 runner last year for indoor. Like, so I trained this small cohort of high school distance runners for their indoor season. Then outdoor, they went with their team. And this guy ended up running the number 2 time in the nation, 152.49 indoors. And I mean, it's funny because I actually haven't I write like track sprint workouts a lot. Once I start getting up to 800 mile, I'm like, all right, I don't know as much here, but like, I feel like this is kind of something I could still do. And a big part of what we did though was like for at least the lifting days is we just come in and play games, and then sometimes for the warm up, and then sometimes we do sprints in between games. We play like pickup soccer or whatever in this turf area, and then I'd lay out the timing and we do a sprint. And like it was unreal how much faster people run when they get to warm up with a game than just like some sort of linear type thing. There's so much power there. And so you're starting to see it come out now. More people are listing like, oh, I warmed up with a game and everyone's vertical was up like 3 inches more than it typically is. And we can harness that stuff. And it should tell us something too about, talk about like atomizing things, like you get like, all right, here's RFD and here's, this fine-tuned expression and compression and expansion and this and this and this and this, and we're going to make you program. And that's good. Like, I think I have tons of respect for people who know way more than I do in all these little areas. But there's something about the sum of the parts that comes together in a game that is way more powerful than all the little things you put into it. Like I could do I could go do change of directions like a game. I could go do a bunch of quick heel taps. I could throw a ball, around to myself. I could, but it wouldn't be the same. It's this thing when you put it all together that's just amazing. And so the more we can kind of leverage some of these principles that make that what it is, that it's just so powerful, and it's more fun. Like it's so much more rewarding in a sense. And I'll leave it with this one caveat: as I do the individual sport, the discipline in an individual sport is, I think, important. And there's a pendulum. You get too far in the game world, I think you can. Like I was just watching a documentary on racehorses, and I'm thinking about having like there's a horse trainer I actually like to have as a guest on my podcast. And like horses want, from my understanding at least, I haven't done that watched that, but horses want to work. They like discipline. They like working hard. And so I think you can like really kind of get on one end of it and be like, oh, well, you shouldn't be a horse. Like, oh, you should just play games, or, well, you need to, or you need more discipline, or you need discipline's the only thing. Culture and discipline's the only thing. And anyways, I think the more we can see these things and integrate them, the more I think I just think we can bring up every level in the course of training.
Yeah. Well, and no, I like that. And also coming from so I grew up on a horse farm. And so
Oh,
you
nice.
talking about horses, I'm like, okay, yeah, completely understand. Because, my fiance and I will see the little horse and carriage. It's walking around. She's like, that's so sad. That's so sad. And I'm like, that's not sad. Like that horse wants to do that.
Yeah.
Like growing up with horses, they want to run. They want the structure, they want the discipline. My dad, we would take in actually retired thoroughbreds and just let them get fat and happy. But my dad, once a week, he'd jump on one and he would, light them up. Like, let's run. And I mean, those horses, they loved it. Afterwards, they're prancing around, they're playing, they're doing all these different things. So it gives them like I don't know if you can say a sense of purpose. I don't know if I could say that, but there's something there and they
Yeah.
need that aspect to it. So uh, that's just a little side
Oh,
tangent.
I think that's awesome though. I mean, that could be a whole show in the sense of like, I just think it's easy to form these camps. Like it's like you have maybe like the Edo Portals, the monkeys, right? They like to like move and do all these cool things. Like you have horses, like, and you hear people refer to athletes as, oh, that athlete's a horse, like that's not by accident. There is like meaning. And I think of humans as like, to my understanding, I believe like we're the most complex organism on this planet. So we don't, like there's animals that probably embody more simple, like this is this type of embodiment of movement. This is this. I think you get humans with different flavors like that you can relate to via an animal. And it helps us to understand each other more. At least that's sorry. I'm like rabbit trailing, but it's something I've been thinking about a lot.
No, you're fine. I mean, well, supple leopard, workhorse, strong like an ox. Like there's so many different little things you can kind of throw around there. And, it makes for some good marketing too here and there. But
Yeah, for sure.
but I do think that having those different traits, personalities within a workout does, and they heighten at different phases, different months and blocks. Like that's the way to go. That's the way I've been training a lot of people as well. It's like go play, go do whatever you want to do at first. Here's some structured warm-ups if you really want to do that. But if you go play some spike ball, like hell yeah, go for it. I think that'd be just as well. But then here's also the discipline aspect. Like, yeah, here's this split squat variation that I know you hate, but you do it, and this is going to have some benefit in the long run. So having those, Yeah, I think you get the buy-in to some degree, and you get people doing some of the things they don't maybe like as much when you do have that play aspect to it. And then also just getting the carryover of, and this actually segues really well, whereas when I talk to you about all this stuff, but getting that conscious to unconscious sort of carryover into sport. So you have like a training quality that they need a little more of X, Y, or Z. It's like, well, here's what it looks like in an isometric, in a strength movement, whatever. But how do you get that to show itself on the field? And so I'm curious, your process and kind of how that looks. I mean, is play like kind of the go-to thing that you're utilizing right now to get that unconscious carryover, or?
Yeah. So I think that, when we look at like, you have Fergus Conley's Game Changer, and you have like the 4 elements of like what leads to transfer to sport. And we have the 2 that are more like the sport itself is technical and tactical. And I think the games can influence the technical more, like skills, like games and skills that you express. But the tactical, like that's the sport. Like that's like if we look at areas of interlap and here's the, I guess, strength coach. And again, that's where I think we can atomize things too much. And that's like my new favorite word. I keep saying it all the time, but I just like it because I'm thinking about it a lot. Like all these compartments, it's like, oh, well, we have strength and conditioning, we have sport coaching. And I think in the perfect world, there's more interlap. And at the very least, there's better communication to see this more as like one whole thing, one whole process. It's not like, all right, well, you're going to go in the weight room and, get strong. And that's like, because it's just like there is a critique of being overly specific too. I mean, there's without question that, but it is interesting because like you think of like, the workhorse, or like I'm reading a book. It's called like The Spiritual Journey of Joseph Greenstein. It's about the mighty Atom, like this 5'4" strongman who was like 80 and still bending metal. And like, there's some, I don't know, like that guy is probably not going to be very good at like basketball or even maybe wrestling, but like it's not the qualities that can allow you to bend metal, which would be like the pure archetype of strength, are not the same as someone who loves to play. Like, how many of the athletes that you have in the gym who are really good at their sport would be like, oh yeah, I really want to like bend these nails and really get into that focused strength. Yes. Like, no, they want to play. Like, it's I don't know. So anyway, so I'm kind of, my mind's like in this kind of like, what do you call it? Like kind of everywhere place this morning. I do apologize for that. But in terms of what transfers like out of games, I think that we just have to keep in mind where we are, what we're doing, what's what. And we have to realize that games are awesome, but they only will cover the hopefully the skill overlap at best. I mean, there is you could say the tactical, like there is space, like you could get into manipulating the space. So James Smith at U of Strength does that, I think, really well from what I've seen in his work. It's like, all right, let's manipulate, or Michael Zweifel, I'm sure, like those guys, like you maybe can get in the tactical a little bit by allowing people different spaces to operate with. But, I don't know. It's interesting to think how far that really goes for people. Like, should a strength coach operating be expected to be really good at strength, and then, oh, I got all these games for you to improve skills and skill interlap and various movements, and then hopefully I can also manipulate the space for you. It's I've almost gotten this sense of like sometimes if you really get to really far in the world of strength and conditioning, it's almost like the save the world. I need to save the world mentality because I know all these things on all these levels of sport, but at the end of the day, like, it just can't be that compartmentalized. So I think you do what you do through games and different iterations of skill. And like you could say, different swing iterations, different throw iterations, different types of jumps, different types of sprints. But at the end of the day, that's still general, and that tactical is to make it the highest level. You have to be good at that at some point. So I don't know. It's kind of a where you are. What do you want to do? What experience do you want athletes to have? Just asking yourself those questions.
So from that, I'm getting that you're more saying that playing the sport will probably get you better at some of these skills that you might be looking for. Like you just have to play the game. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah, I mean, for the like in terms of skills, like let's just say baseball, swinging a bat or something.
Right.
Like there's a lot of things that could actually feed into swinging something. I could be doing, heck, even like baling hay on the farm that has a rotational element to it, like just different different iterations of, I guess, swinging clubs around or whatnot. Like those could all lend to that skill, or even like Mickey Mantle historically, the baseball player with the farthest home run ever on record. He grew up in a mining town in Oklahoma. And like, I think he spent a lot of time in the mines, just where the job is basically, here's your sledgehammer, your pick or whatever. And you smack the rocks until you're tired, hand it off to the next guy. You rest, they go. Like, what an amazing, and this is a guy who hit a baseball 700 feet before weights, was even like a thing, right? Like, what an amazing donor activity. And so I think that a lot of these skills, just by general human conditioning and competency, and you could call it phys ed, like, we can help athletes to generally be better at those things, just, and without even coaching them either, just by kind of, and it also depends on how young you start at working with the athletes. You can work with them younger, they can be better at these skills just by nature. But once you get to the higher levels of sport, like, you can't, especially the skill sports like baseball or basketball, like tennis, like football is a little different because you can be just athletic and be better, at least initially. Like, at some point you have to be so good at the actual tactical elements of that sport to succeed. And that's something that really falls outside of what anyone who is just like a general physical coach could probably give. So that's more like, so it's like, if you look at areas of interlap, it's like, well, how much can I interlap based off what I'm in with a situation? How much can I interlap? If I'm in a university, it might be different. And just kind of go from there. So the tactical is that part that I don't think you can have as much unless you actually play the sport and have that component of what you offer to the athletes.
Yeah, I gotcha. That's an interesting, the pickaxe or, mining town, and then makes him into a better baseball player. Like, it's funny that you mentioned that, because I had a conversation with the guy, Ben Yangs, last week, and we were talking about power lifters versus, you have these like wide infrasternal angles. It's like, maybe the only reason these power lifters, like, obviously their structure is set up to be stronger per se, and they can lift these heavier weights, but they also probably discovered that pretty young. So then they just had more time to get even stronger than, say, some of these narrows who have to work maybe a little bit extra hard to get better at that sport. And, if the narrows can get through the suffering and the failure of that, they can be pretty good. But you have these wide infrasternal angles that are probably just, they have a leg up on them. They have experience as well as a structure that is setting them up for success. So I'm curious if you've ever had some experience with that. I think, it goes the other way too, for wides versus narrows in terms of bounciness, kangaroos versus gorillas, if you want to call it that. Like, you probably don't have too many wides who feel very athletic initially, until they really have to practice it. They have to practice their jumps, all these different things. Whereas a narrow might just be a little more naturally gifted in that. But I'm curious if you've seen that experience or experienced that, and just kind of watching people move.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that, your structure definitely sets you up for what you're good at. So, it's also, excuse me, I think, outside of I would say the world of like strength and weightlifting is probably, or like a football lineman or someone, or shot putter, someone who has to just produce, just be generally sturdy and have a lot of force. Maybe it's just another way of just describing, you doing what you're good at. But in some ways too, I think it is helpful. It is interesting where we live in a culture where I don't think powerlifting used to be obviously powerlifting didn't used to be a sport. It used to be like strongman, right? Or whatever, which wasn't, I'm curious. I mean, I'm sure being a wide ISA probably was helpful to being a strongman in general, but there was a lot of things you could do as a strongman. Like, even if you were a narrow, you could like do tons of, like, you could still like bend iron or whatever. Like, your expressed as strength as a strongman, it's pretty much whatever I'm good at, and then I'm just going to work really hard on that. Maybe it's not like a big, squat or deadlift or linear lift. Well, it's funny, like Logan Christopher has been on my show a few times as, amateur strongman amongst other things. And I think he's like 180, 190 pounds, 6'2". I'm almost positive he's a narrow. His deadlift is like 550, but his squat's only like as much as he does with all, and then this guy can bend nails, rip phone books in half, like all this crazy stuff. But I couldn't tell you for sure, but if you watch his videos, I don't think his squat is really much over 300. And yet he does all these other incredible things. Like, I was at his house back like 3-4 years ago, before it burned down in the hills of Santa Cruz, and he's like teaching me to like rip cards, and like he's got like a whole deck of just like, and I got like 8 cards, and I'm like, I'm just trying. And I'm like, I mean, then there is serious strength to that. But I think that back in the day, if you wanted to be a strength athlete, you could just do what your structure is good at, and so now it's like people who maybe are more predisposed to strength have more of an outlet earlier than perhaps what you did, and all that. This is very like theoretical, but I almost feel like sometimes if you don't tell, so like, I don't know, like if you just had a bunch of kids who are all sorts of different shapes and structures and they're all kind of playing the same games, you do have to kind of adapt for a while and you just get over it and you just deal with it. It's almost like we have more outlets for those expressions now. It's just my 2 cents, but it does make sense that, yeah, like as a narrow myself, like I was, man, like I got caught in the trap big time of thinking, oh, well, good track athletes are strong. And well, I need to be at this level of strength if I'm going to jump this high or run this fast. And that was one of the worst things that I ever, yeah, that's one of the worst things that ever happened to me as an athlete in many senses of the word. I mean, it was, yeah. So trying to sort that out was helpful, but yeah, it's an interesting equation.
Yeah, I was the same way. I remember so I tried to walk on at UK for track and field for 110 hurdles, and I didn't last very long. I was like, I'm not doing this. I'm not getting any money. So I went and joined a fraternity and drank beer instead. But I ended up, still missing that like competitive aspect, still want to push myself. So I got into, weightlifting, and I worked really hard for like 2 years, got my deadlift up. I got my squat up to like 325. My deadlift was in the 400s. And I was like, I should be really fast now. And I went, and I sprinted. And I remember we were playing like intramural soccer. And I was like, what the heck is wrong with me? Like, I'm so slow. I'm so heavy. What happened to me? And I spent 2 years. I didn't do anything athletic, no jumping, nothing.
Yeah.
And it just, it took away my balance, the way I looked at it. But I'm curious if obviously you've had that experience. Do you think that you can take a narrow and turn them into a wide like that, and just that, like, that's what's happening and why someone will lose their bounce? Or is it more just they're heavier, their tendons aren't adapted to that, bounce anymore? What do you think is really happening at that point? Obviously, it's probably some combination, but
yeah, no, this is it, man. This is stuff that's fun to talk about. And it's funny because it's kind of a thing where if you train athletes, like they're always doing athletic things, right? Like, and so I think it's very easy in a gym setting, in a typical strength and conditioning setting, to be hammering all the athletes, whether they're wide or narrow, which barely anyone makes that distinction anyways, for the most part. Like they all get the same program, and the only thing that gets tested and measured is pretty much standing vertical jump. And that's usually going to go up. Although I'll tell you, my standing vertical got wrecked doing, I did the cube method and for about probably 3-4 months, and my power lifts, my deadlifts were like all time high, but my standing vert went down like 4 inches. It was terrible. And my running vert was even worse. But for the most part, as long as I wasn't doing like sports really. I was playing like kind of pick up basketball every now and then though. And it still got really bad. But you have athletes who are at least being athletic on a daily basis, and they're lifting, and what you usually will see is you'll see standing verts go up often, but you'll see reactivity is like meh, like that's probably not going to get better. And I think that if I had to say, why does it happen? I've thought about this. I think it's like 4 things that I can think off the top of my head. One is weight gain. So, and even if it's muscle, doesn't matter. It's still like, this is still forces that the body needs to deal with in like 1/10 of a second, 2/10 of a second. So it compounds itself really fast. So weight gain would be one if you are gaining weight. The next one is I think we become more compression biased, so internal rotation biased. And it's funny because my pendulum has swung a lot of times over the last several years. Like when I first, I used to, back like 10 years ago, and this was in the, what's his name? Timothy something, like the ACL guy and the like Cleveland Clinic and all that, plyometrics where don't let your knees come in when you jump, right? Like your knees can't come in. All plyos should be knees straight. And I'm like, and obviously like once you start to realize that good athletes, their knees come in, you're like, oh, that's stupid. But then you kind of get in this thing, and I would watch myself doing hurdle hops back in the day, and my knees are like almost hitting each other. Like, and now I learned that's like I was into several layers of compensation as a narrow, and that's where a lot of that was coming from. I mean, knees should go in, but they should only go in, there's a limit. Like, right. I mean, and kind of and when you see what's happening. And so I think it's weight. It's you're driving actually too much internal rotation to try to, because everything bilateral is going to be IR driven. Like it's just, and even some unilateral, I think it's just compression based. Like it's like, oh, we're being so much better because we're going single leg, but there's still a heavy weight that's being lifted. There's still a lot of internal rotation you need to generate. So it's like, thinking about, well, the force needed to in the vertical vector to reverse a weight is IR. But the thing is most reactive athletic movements are actually more external rotation biased or dominant. Like there is an IR component, but like in a sprint stride, for example, that IR component is very small, and it's mostly on the level of the foot and ankle, to be honest. Actually, it's like this quick hit in the foot and ankle, and there's mostly like knee and hip. You're seeing a lot of ER throughout the sprint stride. And so I that really hit home for me. That one of the four really hit home for me when I started doing like a lot of low knee running, which Darian Barr was the first person that turned me onto that. I'd seen it in Franz Bosch's books, and it never was really described very much. It was like, low knee running, huh? Like, why would you run low knees? Everyone says run high knees, and like, and I don't know if Franz Bosch's like running system is very conventional. It's very what most people would consider good running technique, as opposed to, what Darian Barr is like totally the opposite. But I found low knee running, the one thing with that, like if I would do like run a low knee, like 200, I would like, and on the walk back, I'd see like a tree branch. I'd go and jump and touch it, or like a pipe in the gym. If I was every run, my jump and reactivity was better and better and better and better. And tempo by nature is expansive. Like if we think of like squatting is compressive and IR driven, tempo running is more ER. That like expands you, that re-expands you. And I that's actually something that took me a while to figure out. I always knew like long sprints were helpful for me as a narrow and like high jumping. And I never exactly knew why. I just chalked it up to, I just think my feet are better or something. It's foot strength, generalized it. Which it is, but it's also, you're re-expanding. You're giving yourself more of that ER kind of reset. And so low knee running is this form of running that the only way to be fast is to absolutely maximize that initial collision that your foot hits. And so your body's going to set up for this really fine-tuned external rotation. So anyway, sorry, long story short, heavy lifting stuff will hurt a narrow. I mean, even a wide too in that respect, I think. From weight gain, you're more of an ER bias. And then another one would be you're deepening your compensation wells. So whatever way you were compensating to make that lift, when you lift, you're especially too, like, I mean, if you usually you're not happy with just lifting the same weight every week, like who is, unless you're an Anatoly Bondarchuk system, and every developmental cycle, it's the same weight the whole cycle. And if you improve, it's because the bar got faster, which honestly, I look at that more. And I'm like, you know what? That was a pretty good idea. Athletes would hate it because I'm like, oh, I want to put more weight on the bar. But it's like, at least it's going to keep you from going down that trail of like deepening these. Like if I'm really like hinging on my my TL junction or something like that, and I have like all these curves in my back where I'm really compressing at these specific places, what's going to happen when that weight gets heavy? You're going to compress harder at those specific places on your spine. So you're also compressing there. And I think that too, I guess you could just say, well, weightlifting is just slower. I mean, that's like maybe that's the fourth. Maybe I lost the fourth in my head somewhere. So I would say it's weight gain that doesn't manifest itself well in reactivity. It's more of being more IR biased when you need to be more expansive biased to be quick off the ground. Gosh, I'm like, it's just slower, which again, that's not necessarily, I mean, as long as the intention, you could take that a lot of different ways. I mean, and then there's you deepening compensation wells. So those would be my four.
What do you think so getting to, some of these more, like, obviously that made sense to me for like a wide, and they're already compressed deep in their, compensation wells, something like that. They probably would benefit from more athletic development, games, something like that. That makes sense. Expansive things. But say you have a narrow that's uncoordinated as all get out and they're lanky, like, do you still think that there is a quality to putting them through just a basic, hypertrophy or just strength training program? What does that look like? Does that make sense? Will that help them?
Yeah, it will. So this is where it's easy to be. I find it easily to like ride these pendulums, like where it's like, oh yeah, knees in for the win. That's awesome. And it's like, oh wait, not too much, because then you lose your like. And again, squatting is a different ball game. Like catching a deep Olympic clean or snatch is a different ball game than like a jump or something. And it's funny. I was actually thinking about this this is a rabbit trail, but I feel like a full from the ground clean squat clean and jerk is actually more expansive than a lot of people's hang clean, because it's like the hit is so quick. It's not like this drawn out pull. It's a quick hit where your knees don't have an opportunity to really come in much. Then you hit that full deep catch, which is expansive. Then you hit that quick compressive zone where the knees come in and then you're out of it. Anyways, sorry, a little bit of rabbit trail. For narrows, and so this is the thing, is athletes need to play to their strengths. Is, you know, it's I think it's admirable to say, well, look, I'm like, you're a narrow, you just need strength. Like that's your weakness. We have to bring that up. And it will be true, but you only need to bring it up so much is the thing. It only needs to come up really to a certain level. And I think it needs to only come to a certain level where the muscles can, the muscle size will elicit the adequate compression, where like the compression of the muscles is a helical thing. It's not just like muscle strength. There's this helical compression that is a result of some cross-sectional area. And Randy Huntington talked about this last time he was on the podcast. He's like, yeah, I had a really skinny guy and the guy just needed meat on his bones. So we didn't go all out, about bodybuilding, but we traded one typical, I don't know, maybe sets of 3, sets of 5, whatever, like type day for a set of 10 type day or a set of 12 where there's like, we're trying to gain hypertrophy. And he said that worked really well for him. And so I think though, honestly, I feel like we should view it as that for that population, not your lifts are bad. And you're like, I don't care what's on the bar. And you know what, if you're getting more powerful and your muscles are getting bigger and we're driving some size, like, yeah, you're going to get stronger. But ultimately I think for any athlete, and a narrow especially, their explosiveness on the track, in their sport, jumping, dunking, cutting, that will drive the neurological power to make a lift better. Like, and that has to be that way. If I try to use lifts to increase the output, I'm just going to, fall into one of those 4, I guess, categories I kind of threw out there on some way, shape, or form. And you may get some good gains early, which does often happen. But the longer you keep on that train and think, oh, well, a little bit is good, well, more is better, you might be becoming more powerful, but you're also, those 4 wells are going to be dragging you down in some, like these 4 hooks, and they're thrown into you. And it's like, I'm fighting because I'm becoming more powerful, but I have this compensation hook that's like pulling me down, or this IR hook that's, causing me to be too compressed in my movements, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Well, it's easy to get caught up to thinking, linear periodization, like, oh, let's just keep trekking up with this and everything should continue to get better all the time. Like, let me add a little bit more muscle mass. Let me keep doing my sprints and try to do everything at once. And it gets back to that cyclical, thing that we were talking about earlier. I think that's, you can still go through these bouts potentially, maybe in the long term for an athlete, but I don't think it needs to be for like these narrow athletes specifically. I don't think it needs to be as scientific. I don't know, maybe that's the wrong word, but it just doesn't need to be what we as strength and condition atomized.
Yes.
I'll use your word right there. There's a guy, I cannot think of his name to save me right now, but listening to like some Dr. Mike Israetel podcast, things like that. And he was talking about, you can get hypertrophy gains pretty easily, and you don't have to go in the gym 6 times a week to do that. No. So I think of these narrows, it's like, what if you give them 2-3 times a week? They do a little machine circuit and they just go 2 to 3 rounds, absolute failure. And you just have them do that for, a month to 3 months. Like, that's probably all they need for an athlete that is very specific to where, they want to do their sport, not be a bodybuilder.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah. I mean, I would say even like I think that's why 1x20 is so popular, to be honest. Yeah. Just because it's more expansive. Like anything that's more blood flow and a little more endurance is more expansive by nature. And it's an expansive, and even like the squats or half squats. So you're not getting into like compression or compensation land. I think I found early that 1x20 deep squats was not a good idea for a lot of athletes, because then I found, it's only half squats. Well, that makes sense. Like, yeah, well, a set of 20 deep squats is like a set of 40 of like bench press almost. It's pretty gnarly compared in the range of motion. But yeah, I think that's why that's so effective, because like it's putting a little bit of meat on their bones. It's giving them opportunity to have more muscle to create that compression, but at the same time, it's more expansive than doing a 5-3-1. And it's allowing an athlete's explosiveness in their sport to create the neurological adaptations of like the power, that real like twitch and that power. And yeah, some athletes might want a little bit more than that or need more than that at some point, especially wides. I think that for a lot of wides, they might want or need more than a 1x20, but, and a lot of people who do 1x20, like Ryan Bracius, I think he does like 3 sets of 3 and then finishes with 1 by 20 or something like that. Like there's a lot of ways you can do that. But I think that just basic, like that basic stuff. And then, if you know about the biomechanics, and then like even just something as simple as squatting on a slant board, well, now you just made your squat even less compressive. Or you could do like a WEC method, WEC 45 deadlift, where you're on like the outside edge of your feet and your knees are out and you're a little bit more supinated in your hands. So now it's less compressive. So you can also take lifts that are by nature less compressive and throw that 1 by 20 or whatever on top of it. And I think that can help those narrows as well. Like I appreciate a lot of that stuff, some of those nuances a little bit more the older I get too. And like the more I understand where my compensation patterns are.
Yeah. Well, I find myself, so what I do is I do a lot of, I should have said this to begin with when we were in the pre-podcast talk, but I do a lot of rehab and then get people back to lifting in the gym, whatever it is that they want to do. But the first thing I do is I get them doing, sets of 15, set to 20, because I'm just trying to expand as much as I possibly can. Because those tissues, a lot of times, we know that pain occurs when a tissue is ischemic, right? There's a lot of tension, compression through that area. So it's like, hey, let's put you on, whatever, an assault bike and get expansive. Like here's 10 minutes there. Here's some, sets of 15, sets of 20. Here's all the blood flow you could ever want, some different movement patterns. And, someone just doing that for 2 weeks has significant reduction in pain and whatever they're having. Not to mention they're just, it instills confidence. They get a pump. People love a pump, right? Like it goes a long way. So it's just funny, like the connections I'm sort of making in this conversation and what you're utilizing as well from this expansive compressive model.
Yeah. The life is in the blood. And I think that it is funny because we can get so far, even like sprint training. Oh, only do like short sprints and only do long rests and that is going to help the neurological component. But what about the recovery element? What about re-expanding? What about, so there we kind of might throw out like a healthy dose of tempo, not an obscene and stupid dose of tempo, but you can even make I think about this too, is like any workout can become more compressive or expansive based off of rest intervals too. Like if I'm running, I was just thinking about this the other day. It looked like Bush Exnator's home base workouts, which is like 8 by 20 meters sprints, but 90 seconds recovery. So he'll say like mild, light dose of lactate. But the way I see it, or like 4 sets of 5 cleans with not like long rest necessarily, like maybe light dose of lactate. And I think you probably want to do a clean from the floor for that. Like hang cleans, I view a hang clean as just compensation central, especially with like the low back and stuff like that. I think you can get really maladapted versions of that. But it's almost like the less rest you have. I mean, you can be stupid with it at some point, but it's like you're turning up or down that blood flow dial, and it's like, if I want to build, and I do find like if you go compressive too long, where it's only max sprint, only like max rest, only max sprint, max rest, like that's a max compression dial. I mean, again, that sprint actually itself is not necessarily compressive. It's more supination bias, but just like by getting more blood into Volve, you turn up the dial, shorten the rest a little bit. It's more blood flow. Your times won't be as fast, but now you have actually infused recovery into it, if that makes sense. And it's almost like periodization is just that in some senses. It's like, what's that dial? Is it expansive or it is compressive? Is there more blood? Is there less blood? And I think that's a cool way. I'm always trying to think of ways to simplify this stuff, because I think we get insane with periodization too. And but I love that the example with just the assault bike, the blood flow, is stuff that gets ischemic and compressive. And the simpler solutions we find that are less like, just minute, the better, like global stuff where maybe I didn't even have to explain to the person why this is working,
Right.
This is just things human beings are meant to do.
Definitely. Well, and you think too about as we age, what do? We dry up, we turn into raisins.
Yeah.
Right. We lose our, how much blood volume, bone density, muscle mass, all those things decrease over time. And so with that, it's like, no wonder you see these people hunched over, compressed, they got a walker, all these things. It almost makes you wonder, it's like, what if we just start dosing people, just like, let's just pump them full of blood. Like, let's just give them more fluids.
Or just every a few times a week, and just I don't know, just doing have to lift, just pump your arms and stuff.
There you go. It's this is probably a dumb archaic thought, but it is. It's like, what if you just pumped some of these older folks with like they just were on like a weekly IV, and you just like you just gave them more fluid. I mean, working in a nursing home and hospital setting, going through physical therapy stuff. I mean, it's pulling teeth trying to get these older folks to just drink water.
Really. Hmm.
Yeah, and it's like, man, what? Why do these people not want to drink water? And then, we just talk about what I just brought up. Like they don't have, they're just dried up raisins in a way. And I don't say that. That sounds really bad. I know
Yeah.
we're all heading that way when I say it that way.
Yeah.
Like that.
I'll be there. I'll be there at some point. Yeah.
Right, exactly. But it's like, what if we just introduce more volume to the system? What would that do? What would the effects be? I don't know. Maybe I'm going to Google that and see if there's any research on just putting more blood or water in old people and see what that does.
Well, it is interesting. I mean, it also brings up like the idea of, at some point, like, big Tommy Johnism. It's some, you have to own it at some point. Like you can't, like it all stems from the central battery of desire. And I'm sure there is elderly people who are like on it, like
Mhm.
my grandfather on my mom's side, like he had all these interesting exercises he came up with these like 10, 20-pound dumbbells into his 80s. He was doing them like these rolls on the floor. And I wish I knew more about, I wish I was inquiring more back in the day. I wish I would have written down his routine. Like
Mm.
it's almost like if the will is there, like it does makes you just think about like, I mean, yeah, like a supplement, like just giving someone a supplement or like a medical based intervention, like blood like that. But also, there's probably, two sides of that coin. But I hope to be on that exercise train as long as I possibly can. I want to be running the 100 when I'm 100 years old. We'll see.
Definitely.
I like that.
Yeah, definitely. What was I think the guy, he set the world record. He ran like I forgot what it was. I think it was like it was still like 10 seconds, and he was like 70 plus. And so it was a world record for um, an elderly man 100-meter dash. And I was like, wow, he's moving. Like, and watching him, like the video of it compared to some of these other guys, it's like, I can't believe this guy's 70 years old. He's running like, a 20-year-old out there. It was super impressive.
I think about that a lot now there was a guy I posted. He was 70 and he ran a 13.4 in the 100.
That's
But
what I
like,
saw. Okay.
someone said the world record was like 12.5. I want to see that race. That blows my mind. Like that is so fast. Like, can you imagine a 70-year-old, like that guy could show up at the JV high school track meet and beat most of the people in that, like,
Yeah.
that's awesome. And a big thing that I've been thinking about is just, I mean, it's probably not related to what we're talking about. It's like, what are all those things that allow for that? And like Sam Weiss has talked about on my show, like a lot of times people who did track when they were younger actually aren't very good later. And we go back to the seasons thing. Like that guy who ran that 13.4 didn't start track till he was 59. And a lot of those masters track athletes are like that. And I think it is because the way we live is imbalanced. Like I think you could do track your whole life and run that fast later. And that's like the path I'm on, is like, how do I, like for me personally, like I high jump 7 feet in college. It's pretty decent. But like if I went out to the track now and 38, it's like I shouldn't have dropped off more than like 8 inches, really. Like 8 to 10 inches is probably a fair drop off. And I'm well worse than that right now, I would say. And like trying to figure out why, and it's not, I mean, I do the same training, if not an upgraded version of training than what I used to do. These are all like systemic and energy related things. It's like, yeah, I have kids and I have, a business to run and, all the stresses of life, and I lifted too much, and like all my lifts basically like went down like 30 pounds when I was turned 35, like just some sort of neurological like decrease. And I've been training my butt off since I'm 11 too. So I'm like, all right, well, I guess if I would have started later, maybe, I don't know. That's a huge interest of mine, trying to figure out how
Is there a tactical component, as you were saying? Like, do you attempt to high jump pretty frequently?
I can't. Now I don't have the opportunity to. When I was at Cal, I could, because I could just walk right out there and high jump
Gotcha.
whenever. Now I can't. Now it's more like, actually this summer I'll be in some track meets this summer, and then I'm, I want to get to a basketball hoop, at least do some dunks and stuff like that. That's like my, and re-expansion is a big part of that too. Like that is at least, it doesn't fit like the neurological decrement that I think comes from energy mismanagement, just from like going through life and having kids and all that stuff. But re-expansion has been a massive element. Like the more tempo I run, the more extreme isos I do. Doing extreme isos right before a workout, that's a hugely expansive stimulus right before the compressive bit, and then re-expanding after has been really massive. Stuff that you didn't need to do when you were 20, but now I'm like 38, and like that's where I get some of the best results these days from doing that kind of thing.
So I know we're getting close on time here. I do have one more question for you, and sort of an idea that I've had, and it relates back to you were talking about the gentleman who, he deadlift really well, but his squat, it's just like, it's you would expect those numbers to be higher. So we have these ISA measurements, which that kind of gives us an idea of the archetype that what the person's shape is. But would you ever take into consideration like actually taking like or do you think there's a ratio or something where we could look at someone's tibia, their femur length, as well as like maybe in relation to their torso and say, hey, like, is this person potentially going to be better at X, Y, and Z sports or lifting activities? Is that something that you would ever consider doing?
Yeah, I know Randy Huntington did a little bit of that with track. Like apparently if you have longer tibias relative to femur, that means you're like a better like long sprinter, which is funny because that's me, but I'm like, man, my 400 kind of sucks. Although I will say like I mean, it's honestly better than my short sprinting always bewildered me. Even when I jumped 7 feet, a middle distance runner beat me in the 30-meter dash that year, and like in our testing, and I was so mad. Like I was so mad. I always felt better once I kind of got up and going and had a little bit. So yeah, I think there's something there for track. I think for team sport, I don't know. I mean, it's something that I would only really be able to tell you for track, I think, for the most part. And I wouldn't want to steer anyone away from any event because their body, I think like having kids myself, you give kids the opportunity, and I think they're going to kind of gravitate towards the thing that they're pretty good at eventually. I think it kind of happens on its own. I mean, if we were in the old Soviet, system where you really had these like talent farms, or you went around and saw who's good at what, I think it could be beneficial, if that's what you're trying to do. But now I just think, for the most part, let kids play and do what they like and see what they like. And then eventually they'll probably pick the thing that fits what their body is pretty good at.
Yeah. I think of it almost as like panning for gold in a way. Like it'll kind of it'll find its way there. If it's in the pan, it's in the pan. And, you think too, I think if we were probably going about it, that's a very atomized approach. I would say like, hey, I'm going to measure your tibia to see if you're going to be good for X, Y, and Z event. But then you are really limiting these, black swan events, if you would want to call them that. Like, you look at Usain Bolt when he first came around, it's like, man, this guy's way taller than a lot of these shorter, 100-meter dash sprinters. So it's like, you wouldn't have scenarios like that popping up to some degree.
Yeah, that guy would have ran the 400 and 800 in some sort of other system, to be honest. Like,
exactly.
He runs a little bit more like a middle distance or like a 400 run on some level. Like it's yeah, I totally agree with you on that.
Yeah. So, well, Joel, I think we'll call it there. I really appreciate you coming on the show, man, and giving us your time. So if you want to hit us with where we can find you, all that good stuff, plug your products, everything.
Yeah, I mean, you can find my link tree on Instagram, Just Fly Sports. Lots of interesting things there. So, yeah, to Instagram, Just Fly Sports, and Twitter, Just Fly Sports, Just Fly Performance Podcast. Probably the best areas. We do have a website, justflysports.com. So, yeah, check us out there and see what you like.
Perfect. Thank you again, Joel, and we will see you all in the next one. This episode is brought to you by the Broken to Beast Protocol. This is a program that is meant for you. It's to help you gain muscle, get jacked, but without putting all of the excess stress on your joints. We've got video tutorials for every single exercise. We have a self-assessment to make sure that you're doing the right warm-ups and exercises for your body. We really try to take the exercise and build it out so that way it is set for your body type versus trying to make your body fit to the exercise. So again, you want to check this out over on Instagram. It is at Broken to Beast. That is Broken, the number 2 Beast. Check it out on Instagram. Join the newsletter for it. It will be out this month in May. Don't miss out on it. We'll have an early bird special for all those folks that have been waiting.